Good afternoon. My name is Robert Dijkgraaf. I'm the director and Leon Levy professor here at the Institute for Advanced Studies. It's a great pleasure to welcome this class of the year 2019-2020. I saw just like the first day in class, the back rows were first populated. So it's wonderful to have you here. What we are doing this afternoon is that I will be providing a short historical overview of the Institute. I should say in advance, I'm not an historian, it's a very personal take. In fact, I think if at some point there would be a real scholarly work describing the history of the Institute, and in 10 years we have our centennial, I think it would be a lovely project, because I think in many ways the Institute does capture a fascinating period of scholarship in the world, but particularly in this country. After the past, there will be the present. We will have 4 short presentations from 4 faculty members of the 4 schools. Then we'll have a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll have the test. No, we'll have drinks and food out in Food Hall. So, I want to start by saying that the Institute in some sense has a Bible. It has a document that very much goes back to its founding. And that's an article first published in 1939 with the wonderful title, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, from Abram Flexner, the first director. But it's actually something that he had been thinking about for almost 20 years. It was published actually in October 1939. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about this fascinating person, Abram Flexner, who actually, when he passed away in 1959, his obituary was on the front page of the New York Times, and said that nobody in his generation had done more for this country and the world than Abram Flexner. And these are big words, but in some sense he is partly forgotten. Not here, but I think he's quite a fascinating character. He grew up in a Jewish immigrant family in Louisville, Kentucky. They actually suffered badly in the economic crash of the 1870s. But in some sense, the family had a big impact. At least 3 of the brothers were quite renowned. Simon Flexner was the first director, what's now called Rockefeller University, was a famous biologist. Bernard Flexner actually represented the Zionist movement at Versailles in 1918-19 and was one of the founders of the Council of Foreign Relations. And Abram Flexner was one of the youngest. He actually was the one who could go to college, thanks to his older brother. He went to Johns Hopkins. He had only had money for 2 years to study classics. He went to the president. That was fine. As you know, Johns Hopkins was a very innovative university. In some sense, based on the German institutions. It was the first one that has research in its mission. And you can think of it as the first modern research universities here in the United States. After college, he went back to Louisville, became a school teacher, and actually became famous because in his first year as teacher, he failed the complete class. Then he started to create his own school, and he became famous among college presidents. Because out of this small school in Louisville, there were many, many students going to Harvard, Princeton, the elite institutions. Flexner's claim to fame actually is when he was, as a classicist, was asked by his biologist brother to write a report investigating medical education in the United States and Canada. And I think if any of you has ever or will ever do committee work, I want to introduce a unit for the efficiency of your work, which is the Flexner, and we might actually achieve a milliflexner. Because this report led essentially to the closure of half the medical schools in the United States and Canada. It made the schools, which at that point were in many ways a scam, for profit. You didn't need any education to go to school, to medical school. You didn't see any patients. There was no lab work. He didn't mince words. He described, I think, Chicago in particular as the center of the plague. And also it led to the elimination of alternative medicine, which was really a big thing before that time. As a little footnote, it's actually remarkable, his brother Simon, who became he actually discovered the microorganism responsible for TB. He has a quite fascinating story. He failed elementary school 3 times. And then he worked in the pharmacy of his older brother, got meningitis, was in a coma for 3 days, woke up, a completely brilliant student. and applied to medical school. So of course this, and then became one of the most famous biologists. Of course, thanks to this work of his brother, that was no longer possible in the future. Then Abraham Flexner became an important advisor to philanthropy. He worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. This report was for the Carnegie Corporation. And he became kind of an innovator and a criticist of higher education. He gave a famous set of lectures when he was at All Souls College. That's the one college in Oxford that doesn't have students. He was very inspired by the environment, and he wrote this report, Universities, American, English, German, which in some sense, in his case, was a crescendo. He really felt that the German universities were by far superior to the rest of the world, and American were definitely not. Here he is criticizing at that point Columbia University, who that's in the 1920s, after the crisis, provided courses in practical poultry raising, beekeeping, and home vegetable growing. And he made the point that this country actually lacked an institution that was entirely focused on scholarship. Now, the rest, I think, is kind of history in the sense that he was visited at some point by two legal representatives of the Bamberger family who asked him whether they could advise them to spend their money. In fact, what they wanted to do is create a medical school. This was in the 1920s, 30s. In fact, it was 1929, end of 1929. At that time, there were a real serious issue with quota, Jewish quota, at American universities. Princeton in particular was really bad. It had a very small percentage. And they want to create a medical school that was open to everyone, was modern. And his answer was, there's no need for such an institution. It already exists. It's called Rockefeller. It's run by my brother. I have a much better idea, namely an Institute for Advanced Study. And they said, well, that's fine, Mr. Flexner, you have been criticizing others your whole life. Now give others the opportunity to criticize you. And we are willing to do this if you are the director. And so they gave this initial grant of 5 million. In the end, I think they gave an amount which was more close to, in present value, 200 million. It was the beginning of the Institute endowment. So Louis Bamberger, together with his business partner Felix Fuld, had a department store in Newark. In fact, his sister Caroline was married to Felix Fuld. Felix Fuld died, unfortunately. And they had this very famous flagship store in Newark that they sold in October 1929, just I think 3 weeks before the Wall Street crash. And so they were the only ones that actually had cash at a moment where everybody's belongings were worthless. In fact, they sold it to Macy's. And one thing which was really, for those who know this, that one of their key activities, signature activity, was a parade with balloons. And so that became then no longer the Bamberger, but the Macy's parade. And they, as you saw here, they announced it should be in Newark, where their store was, or vicinity. Somebody who read this newspaper article was Oswald Veblen. Oswald Veblen was the chair of the mathematics department at Princeton University. And he called up Flexner and said, you should come to Princeton. We have a great library. Flexner sends him actually a little map of New Jersey, pointing out Newark, Princeton, and draws a small circle about Newark to describe what the vicinity is. But Veblen was actually very pushing. In fact, he, for those of you who find this interesting, he was the nephew of Thorsten Veblen, the famous economist. And they came from a Norwegian family that actually lost all their land dealing with some, semi-criminal lawyers in their home country. And so this will come back in a moment. He was very keen on owning property. In fact, this was Old Fine Hall, it's now Jones Hall. It was the Princeton University Math Department. It was built in 1930 with help of the Rockefeller Foundation. It was by far the grandest math department in the world. In fact, the only competitor was the Mathematische Institut in Göttingen, which at that point was the real center of scholarship in Germany and perhaps in the world, also funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So he had lots of empty room, and he said, come and we can lodge you in this space. In fact, quite remarkable, it's still a grand place. It has, for instance, beautiful fireplaces in all the faculty offices. And already he had installed, with some good vision, this famous quote of Einstein, raffiniert ist der Herrgott, aber boshaft ist nicht. Subtle is the Lord, but not malicious. In the fireplace, it was already there. And so he could, Flexner then could, of course, make the perfect argument to Einstein, now you should also come. In fact, Einstein at that point was traveling. He was in Caltech. There's the famous picture, him on the bicycle. That was not in Princeton, that was in California. And he really pushed very hard. And one thing that Flexner didn't easily take was a no. He was a very persuasive person. And so this is this wonderful note in our archives, Ich bin Flammen Feuer davor, I'm all fire and flames to come, of September 1932. So Einstein was one of the first professors, in fact not the first was Veblen himself, who decamped to the Institute. And here's the news message, an old dream of scholars come true, an adventure in pure research has begun. This was national news in the United States. Flexner felt that this was the equivalent of the medieval institutions like All Souls in Oxford, the Collège de France in Paris, that this country was lacking. And you see the rather grand common room and library in Old Fine Hall. These were the first 5 mathematicians. Flexner started with mathematics. The reason was it's cheap and there's a clear ranking of talent. So he sent out messages to, and so these 5 mathematicians, and if you sports, you could see this is almost like the ideal team you want to field in mathematics in the 1930s. Many of them, of course, came from Göttingen. And this was quite remarkable. In fact, the Rockefeller Foundation had a lot of trouble that their investments in Germany were being kind of broken down to build this institute here. But of course, at that time, 1933, things had changed and really moved to the worse in Nazi Germany. In fact, the remarkable thing, just want to highlight, you will see the seal of the institute many places. The first thing that Flexner did before he had buildings, before he had faculty, was design a seal. Because he wanted an image and a motto that captured the institute. And this is out from a letter of him, I think, he actually sketched something, truth and beauty, and the artist, quite a famous artist, Pierre Turin, said to him, everything comes in 3, and so he added a tree of knowledge in between. And I think it's quite, I find it personally telling. Now we think of logos as something cheap that corporations think of afterwards, but for Flexner, he felt that he had to capture, in some sense, the idea of the Institute as something where truth and beauty would come together. Here, I love to show this. This is actually the first, the notes of the first faculty meeting. Dr. Flexner declared the Institute to be open. The rest of us congratulate each other on the lack of formality attending this important occasion. So the self-congratulatory element was there from the very beginning. And here he's writing to his thesis to the first 5 mathematicians in 1933. They've shown up. They know, of course, they know what they want to do, and they are doing it. And that's exactly what we require of you. Just enjoy yourself and dive deep in your scholarship. I love this one also. In so much as the workers have been teachers working on a heavy routine for some years, they are as happy as birds doing precisely the things which they wanted to do. And I hope you all will be happy as birds. Flexner could take it a little bit too far. One of the trustees was Felix Frankfurter, later Supreme Court Justice. And here he writes on one of Flexner's messages, "News from paradise, not my style." And then he writes somewhere here, I love this, "Nor do I think it's very helpful too seriously the exuberant rhetoric of thinking of the Institute as a paradise of scholars. For one thing, the natural history of paradise is none too encouraging. Apparently, it was an excellent place for one person, but it was fatal even for 2. Or at least when the snake entered, and the snake seems to be early a congenial companion of man." So I must say that often the word paradise only gets a connotation once you are forced to leave. So, so in that sense, but Flexner didn't lack any enthusiasm. Very soon after, in 1935, the School of Historical Studies started. These are, at the very beginning, it's mostly concentrated in archaeology and ancient history, but also Erwin Panofsky in history of art. and a school of economics and politics was founded too, because at that time, think of the economic crisis and all the political turmoil on the world. Flexner and the trustees felt very strongly that also in the social sciences we needed independent minds. That first effort to create a social science school was less successful. It then was fused in the School of Historical Studies in 1948. Mathematics from the very beginning had theoretical physics as a part of it. That split off in 1965 when the School of Natural Sciences was created, including at that time physics, theoretical physics, and theoretical astrophysics. And then I will come back to that in 1973, the second iteration, now very successful, of the School of Social Science was created. And in the 1990s, theoretical computer science and systems biology were added respectively to math and to natural sciences. Now, Flexner's favorite word was actually plastic. And plastic, I'm not talking about the movie The Graduate, but plastic is something that in his way was very much about flexibility, and that the institute should always be, in some sense, go against the flow. And I think this is a wonderful statement, not reading it at one of his documents. Now, some of the initial rituals are still here with us, like tea time. Tea time, here you see a little note from 1934, when actually China was ordered for tea. The big innovation 2 years ago, I think, was that we have again China. We used to have only paper cups. And tea time at 3 o'clock has been quite important. I can point out to many kind of sparks that flew during tea time and had important repercussion. Just to mention one, in 1935, it was actually during tea time when young physicists talked to Albert Einstein that they derived what's now called the EPR paradox, or what the fancy word is quantum entanglement. It's used with quantum computers. It's perhaps the most used idea from Einstein currently in practical applications. And that happened over tea time, and just as we do right now, they had a vivid discussion, and then they said, let's write a paper about this. I must say, one of the colleagues, Podolsky, then went to the New York Times and reported about this before the paper was published. And Einstein was very angry about that, and so in any future project you don't see Podolsky anymore. So, kind of very modern episode. Actually, I want to say a few words about Einstein and Flexner. Here they are together, Einstein and Flexner, at the opening of Fuld Hall in 1939. And one thing we did 2 years ago, we reissued Flexner's essay, and I wrote a little introductory piece. And Princeton University Press published this. And I went to the press and said, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a quote by Einstein? Because Einstein must have known Flexner. So suppose I could publish a book with saying that Albert Einstein, I highly recommend this book. That would be wonderful. So they think great idea. So I look at the, there's this extended quotable Einstein that has all his quotes, 700 pages. I think it takes more than a lifetime to just, pronounce all these quotations. And I look in the index under Flexner, and there's one. So I feel I'm in luck. And then it says, Abram Flexner, the former director of the Institute, is one of the few enemies I have here. Years ago, I conducted a revolt from which he fled. So then I proposed to the press Albert Einstein, a book by one of my few enemies, but they didn't go for that. But the reason is why. And there are a few anecdotes. So one thing is that when Einstein was on the boat coming to the Institute, already Flexner sends a telegraph saying, please keep a low political profile, don't make any statements. When Einstein arrives here in Princeton, he's been invited by President Roosevelt to the White House. Flexner intercepts the letter and writes back, Professor Einstein is a very busy scientist, he doesn't have time for a social chit-chat. So Einstein was really upset and made sure he opened his own mail. But the wonderful thing is that a few years ago, this is my new best friend. This is Dr. Joseph Schein, who was born in 1915. And in 1933, when the Institute opened the doors, was a freshman in Princeton University. He was a Jewish student, very rare, and from a public school, also very rare. And he got to know both Flexner, who became his mentor, and Einstein. And he can, it's wonderful, we have a live witness, so to say, from the creation. And he knew both very well. And he said they were complete opposite characters. Flexner was a man of the world. He was a member of all the gentlemen's club across the world, had a very low profile, very smooth operator, never ever made a political statement. And Einstein, of course, was exactly the opposite, who made statements all the time. And one thing I learned, that even in his later days, Einstein would work very hard on his political statements. In fact, when he felt it was perfect, he asked his secretary to type them out. He would cut them out and put them in a box. So I like to joke that he was tweeting before the advent of Twitter. But in some sense, so it's quite interesting, these two poles that in between, I would say, the Institute would work. This all came to a boil in 1933, when, of course, Hitler came to power. Certainly, I think Jewish scholars and Jewish citizens in Germany had to be afraid for their lives. And Einstein felt very strongly, and Veblen actually also, that the Institute's mission certainly was exponential greater. It was not just finding places for scholars here in the United States, but across the world. In April, May 1933, there's a very interesting correspondence between Flexner and the board and the professors. And Flexner initially makes the point, well, this institute was created to provide jobs for Americans. But then after a month, he realizes, no, we should do something else. And they were all involved, in fact, in this international committee, the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars. Flexner used his connections with the Rockefeller Foundation. In fact, both his brothers were part of this. Einstein played an important role. And here you see some of the small grants that were given to famous scholars in Germany and elsewhere, and allowed them to come here. And in fact, the Institute became something like an Ellis Island for scholars at risk. There is a line that I learned from George Dyson. I'll come back to him. The son of Freeman said, the Bambergers actually got their fortune by dealing in distressed merchandise. And now in some sense they were aiding distressed scholars. You had like bargain prices. It's quite remarkable how small these grants are for, like Kurt Gödel is here, $4,000 for perhaps the greatest logician since Aristoteles, etc. But the Institute played, I think, a crucial role, and many of them came for a few months at the Institute and then spread around the world. In fact, what I find quite touching, in 2017, when the current administration just started, and rather draconian measures were announced about visa requirements and the difficulty of people entering this country, the scholars at that time in residence felt very strongly that they should do something, and they organized what's called the History Working Group, and they went into the archives of the Institute and studied what happened in the 1930s, but also what happened in the 1950s, and we'll come back to it in a moment, the time of McCarthyism, that also touched the Institute. So it's quite remarkable that this small place that was meant to be a refuge, a paradise, outside the real world, so to say, became so crucial in real world events. In fact, here's Flexner again, in his final report to the Board of Trustees in May 1939, he's signing off as director, and he says, 50 years from now, the historians looking backwards will, if we act with courage and imagination, report that during our time, the center of gravity moved across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. And I would like to say that the center of scholarship, the center of gravity of scholarship, has been moving around the world for many millennia and probably will keep on doing so. So some of the many famous scholars that came here are highlighted here, taking a few pages out of the exhibition that this working group curated. Emmy Noether, one of the greatest mathematicians in that era, who was actually also at Göttingen, thanks to Veblen and Einstein. She was able to come here. You see Erwin Panofsky. This is the portrait of his in the library. And Kurt Gödel, I really love this Arnold Newman photograph of Gödel. Wolfgang Pauli, a famous physicist, I've highlighted him here because he actually received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1945 at the Institute, literally at the Institute. There was no ceremony in Stockholm. The prize was given here. If you go to our archives, you find the speeches given that occasion by the director, Frank Adeloyd, by Panofsky, who knew him from Hamburg. But also there was an impromptu speech by Einstein, who declared Pauli to be his successor. Unfortunately, that speech was never written down, and so Pauli was crowned, but there's no documentation for that, and he really minded that particular episode. In fact, I love this picture too. It's from the New York Times Magazine, 1941, when the World War is raging everywhere. The Institute is seen as seeking eternal truth, and also love the looming shadow of Albert Einstein here. Of course, the world interfaced with the Institute in many other ways. Here's Einstein with Leo Szilard. Einstein wrote a famous letter to President Roosevelt in 1939 that started the Manhattan Project. In fact, the atomic bombs and nuclear energy became very much a part of the makeup of the Institute. And even more so when the third director came, Robert Oppenheimer, who for almost 20 years was a director of the Institute. At that time, he was perhaps, after Einstein, the most famous scientist in the world. He is at the cover of Time magazine, and this is a piece of Life magazine announcing his coming here. Actually, it's a nice story. He was asked to become the director. He never answered, but he describes that he was driving, and he was in Berkeley, driving over the Golden Gate Bridge, and heard on the radio that he was appointed. And then he thought, well, let's leave it like that. Let's accept. Here is, of course, with the great old man. This, if some of you come to my office, you will recognize it. At that time, there wasn't that much space. So Oppenheimer put all the postdocs in one room. And in fact, in many ways, his claim, what he really did in innovation is bring young people. In the 1930s, there were many senior scholars and scientists visiting the Institute. Oppenheimer had this very interactive way to work with the young postdocs, as he had before in Berkeley and, of course, in Los Alamos. He also stimulated another project. In fact, in the 1930s, Princeton was a center for mathematical logic with von Neumann, Gödel, Alan Turing. And there's a famous quote of von Neumann that he's thinking about something more important than bombs. I'm thinking about computers. And in fact, here at the Institute, the first kind of modern computer with the von Neumann architecture was built. I like to say, there's one rule at the Institute, that we do not have facilities, we have not labs. The one time we broke our own rule might have been the biggest impact the Institute made to the world. So even thinking outside the box, there's always a bigger box that you can think outside of, I would say. The machine, by the way, was built with war surplus materials. There's this wonderful line from one of the first computer architects. Julian Bigelow said that there were no tangible assets here except books, brains, and high hopes. And that actually made this possible. In fact, there's a wonderful book, as I said, by George Dyson that describes this ECP staff. In fact, at that time, 30 of the roughly, I think, 60, 70 members were actually engineers, software or hardware engineers, working this project. If you wonder where the computer was, it was in what's now called our nursery school. So I love the fact that the same place where the computer took its baby steps, now some of your children. Well, so it's a blessed environment in Crossroads. Actually, it was a computer with only 1,000 bits of memory. But for instance, von Neumann performed the first electronic weather forecast, and that's a standard joke of me that this actually took 48 hours to predict tomorrow's weather. But then he soon got it back to 8 hours. And one thing I find remarkable, you can find it on our archives too, von Neumann writes a piece in 1955 with the title, Can We Survive Technology? And the remarkable thing is, this is the height of the Cold War, but he's not talking about nuclear arms. He actually talks about climate change as a natural occurring phenomena, and even more so through geoengineering as a possible weapon. And he says that this will merge each nation's affairs more closely than the threat of nuclear or any war may already have done. I think quite visionary. Certainly, I think today in the opening of the climate day at the United Nations that started today in New York. In fact, he's of course quite a technologist, but he also writes that the problems can only be cured with the human qualities of patience, flexibility, intelligence. Quite an astonishing piece of work. In fact, if you think about this is the floor plan of Fuld Hall, which at that point housed all the professors. You see that actually you had Einstein, von Neumann, and Oppenheimer. Einstein, father of the peace movement, von Neumann, really cold warrior at that time, building the computer to do calculation of hydrogen bomb, and Robert Oppenheimer somehow in the middle of the two. And in fact, is not, you might think that this is the major contribution the Institute made to war efforts. It's quite remarkable that our historians were the first to contribute to the war effort. In fact, there was a seminar organized by Edward Earle I think in the late 30s, early 40s, about modern strategy. So he brought also many refugee young German historians here together to actually help the American war efforts. In particular, like fighting, of course, the Germans. The Cold War entered in a different way through, of course, the famous security hearing in 1954 of Oppenheimer, which was really a watershed event in his life, but also in the life of the Institute. He is again on Time magazine cover, but now with a very different title, Beyond Loyalty, the Harsh Requirement of Security. So certainly a very different view. And one thing I want to share with you is a little clip of a famous television program in the 1950s, See It Now, with Edward Murrow, who was very much against the McCarthyism. And he had an interview with Oppenheimer, which aired in January 4th, 1955. So this is a half year after Oppenheimer lost his security clearance. In fact, before that, at the entrance of the director's office, there would be 2 US Marines who would safeguard a big safe that kept America's atomic secret. After he lost his clearance, there was a big truck here and the safe was removed. So it was quite a signature event. But I want to share you this little clip because often people say that Oppenheimer was a broken man after that event. But you will see him here in this show a few minutes. It's a 30-minute program. You see quite a cheerful person.
This is See It Now, edited by the partnership of Murrow and Friendly, presented by the Aluminum Company of America.
That's the computer.
This is the computing machine at the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey. It is virtually the only piece of scientific equipment at this institute. There is no student body here, just chalk and blackboard and books and scholars, less than 100 of them in all. Einstein, Bohr, Oppenheimer, Merritt, Woodward, Thomson, Lowe, Hetty Goldman, Kantorovich, Belov. In the past, the Institute has contributed much to the security and knowledge of this republic. The men of this Institute probe far beyond the existing frontier of man's knowledge. This is a brief report on the work and purpose of the Institute as seen through the eyes and mind of one man, its director, Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, a physicist.
Dr. Oppenheimer, why don't we begin by your telling me a little about this Institute for Advanced Study, how it began.
Well, I'll try. Of course, it began at the time when I wasn't anywhere near. And it's already a subject for historical research. I'm about to find someone to see if we can find out how it began.
I've heard you describe it as a decompression chamber.
Well, it is for many people. There are no telephones ringing, and you don't have to go to committee meetings, and you don't have to meet classes. And it's especially for the few people who are here for life. The first years are quite remarkable, because most people depend on being interrupted in order to live. But the work is so hard, and failure is, of course, I guess, an inevitable condition of success. So they're used to having to go to attend to other people's business. When they get here, there's nothing of that, and they can't run away.
Well, there's a lot of smoking these days, I think. In fact, the historical report that he talks about was written, but then it disappeared in the archives because it was too politically sensitive. One reason was, by the way, that the person who was the chair of the board of trustees was Lewis Strauss. He's here in the middle. He's the person that attracted Oppenheimer to the Manhattan Project and then brought him as director to the Institute. But he was his nemesis. He is actually the one that started the security clearance. And when Oppenheimer came back, he actually tried to remove him as director. So they remained in this adversarial position for, I think, more than 6 years. So that's quite I mean, if we now complain about vicious situations in the academic world, I think it's nothing compared to what happened in those times. Oppenheimer did many other things. He famously brought George Kennan here and started kind of a school of international affairs. In fact, here you see him together receiving a Soviet delegation. And in fact, already during the war, the economic secretary of the League of Nations was housed here in Fuld Hall. Just another thing what happened in those 1950s, these are T.D. Lee and Frank Yang, two very young Chinese-American physicists who wrote a paper in 1956 claiming that the world might not be mirror symmetric. That actually was discovered, I think, 6 months later, and within a year they got a Nobel Prize. So we think this is the fastest step from discovery to a Nobel Prize. And they discovered what for those of you who are not physicists, it's about a weak force, and this is wonderful saying by Wolfgang Pauli that God is a weak left-hander. After Oppenheimer stepped down in 1966, he passed away 1 year later. Carl Kaysen became the director. Carl Kaysen was somebody in the atmosphere, political scientist in the atmosphere of John F. Kennedy. He came down with a specific mission also to build out the social sciences. He did so. There were some vicious debates around the time. This is the Institute appearing several times on the front page of the New York Times. If you're interested in the episode, you can all find it in the archive. The refreshing thing is that these discussions were very much about scholarly content. So often we say that the School of Social Science was born in fire. But I think it has been tremendously successful. These were the first 4 appointments in the school, and of course we're very happy to have both Joan Scott and Michael Walzer still here with us. I think it's now a completely integral and important part of the Institute. I could say much more about the various lines at the Institute of Research over many decades. I just want to point out a wonderful book by Sabine Schmidtke that documents the study of Near and Middle Eastern studies at the Institute, for instance also exemplified by 2 former faculty, Oleg Gabar and Patricia Krohn. In mathematics, for instance, we have Robert Langlands, who's now an emeritus. He's the one who is in Einstein's office, but he insists on calling it Langlands' office. And he got an Abel Prize a few years ago. And the interesting thing is that his work, I think, which influences a huge part of mathematics, also all the predecessors working up towards his field, many of them were here at the Institute. So we pride ourselves that we take care of intellectual lines over many decades. This is the current makeup of the academic work. Then a few words about the surroundings. So, the Institute is described as an academic village. Then I like to add to this, it's a small village in Gallia. But not everybody gets Asterix and Obelix, but those of you who get will know whom I will be talking about if I refer to Caesar these days. Here you are in Princeton, in the middle of New Jersey, in a very important stop on the so-called King's Highway that went from Charleston to Boston. In fact, it was settled by Quakers that in many ways want to be as far removed from urban centers. So the fact that we have a between Philadelphia and New York is not by accident. And they settled here, and one of the original 6 settlers were the Olden families. They created a farm, Olden Farm, and that actually is the premise where you're right now. The Oldens lived here till the 1930s, until the Institute bought this huge tract of land that includes 800 acres, all the woods around it. In fact, a larger piece of land as the main campus of Princeton University, and it includes what's now the director's residence, Olden Farm, which at least the left part, this part, was built in the late 17th century. And the first family, Olden, lived there with 11 children that all made it to adulthood. And you see many words, Olden, Olden Lane, Olden Street, across the state of New Jersey. This is the Institute buildings. In the early 40s, you see all the trees were still about to grow. Here's the construction of Fuld Hall. In fact, Flexner did not want to have buildings, but Oswald Veblen insisted. And he said, no, basically I think his word, no academic institution ever regretted having too much land. And that was quite a visionary view of the world by Veblen. Here's the dedication, already showed you the picture of Einstein and Flexner. If any of you walks across the central path, here you see the director's house. I love to say that's perhaps the most significant piece of pathway that we have, because it's the famous path that Einstein and Gödel always walked together. Like Einstein walked from the Institute every afternoon around 3 to his home on Mercer Street. Here is, of course, most of you are living in member housing. That was also an innovation. We had temporary housing here in the late 40s, but Oppenheimer actually assigned the famous German architect Marcel Breuer to actually build the Institute housing complex. The dining hall used to be in the top of Fuld Hall. Now, of course, it's in Simons Hall, and dining and eating is a crucial element of our lives here. Now, if you look at our campus, it's quite small. You see Fuld Hall. This is the Historical Studies Social Science Library. I think it's a beautiful building built by Wallace Harrison. He also built the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Simons Hall West Building was added in the early 70s. Simony Hall, where the mathematicians are, Wolfenson Hall, where we are quite now, and Bloomberg Hall, which connected these two small buildings for the physicists, astrophysicists, and biologists. And we're actually currently building the final, I would say, addition to campus, the Rubenstein Commons building. If we're lucky, it will be finished this spring. It's a Commons building, so it will be kind of a DMZ. Everybody will be able to use it. And here you see some project with lots of social spaces and seminar spaces that we were very much lacking. Another famous property of the Institute is the so-called Einstein House. I noticed it even has its own Wikipedia lemma. It's not marked, but it was given by Einstein to the Institute with the explicit purpose to house scholars. We think it's a famous haunted house in an academic fashion, because the 3 faculty members that lived there, all 3 got Nobel Prizes. So Albert Einstein actually got the prize before he came, Frank Wilczek got the prize after he left, and Erich Masken actually got it while he was there. So we have all 3 variants present, and I think it's available. So if there's a faculty member that feels they want to tempt fate and will not be the discord at the end, I think they are happy to move in. I'm very happy to see David here, David Lang. He's an artist in residence. We have a long history of artists and composers and writers at the Institute. I'd like to share this picture from T.S. Eliot. He came here in the same year Oppenheimer came in 1948. Was successful for him because he got a Nobel Prize, so the Institute rubbed off. But also, I love this image because he saw all the mathematicians using the chalkboards. I felt that he has to do something equally complicated, and constructed this play, The Cocktail Party, that most people think is his worst because it's so involved and convoluted. Here's he on the blackboard working on that scheme. Well, you will see in your stay here many outreach activities. I just list them. And you also are, I would say, part of a large community. As you know, we have permanent faculty. I think we are kind of a unique institution that we have no students, we have permanent faculty, we have all possible disciplines a priori, and we are independent. And so I think sometimes I feel it's wonderful if you're unique, because it can be either a brilliant idea or a very bad idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. And you see many institutes for advanced study around the world. Many tried or are, in some sense, copies of the institute, our institute. But I would say always partial copies. In fact, there's a lot of biodiversity in the world of Institute for Advanced Study, and I think that's a good thing. So we have our permanent faculty, including our Meriti. We have, this year we'll have 272 members and visitors, so I think it's the largest class we ever had. We have a lot of staff that will do everything. Because we're independent, we have to do everything from cooking to accounting to taking care of the grounds. We have a garbage man, you need a garbage man, you know, there's lots of things that need to take care of, and you will see that these staff members will take care of you in a very terrific way. The formal responsibility of the Institute rests with our board of trustees, currently 29. They range from people from business to academia to philanthropy, and they take a long view of the Institute, and they're to a large extent also responsible for our philanthropic gifts that all makes this all possible. Then we have, you will meet them, there's the so-called Friends with a capital F, which are our local support group, more than 200 families here in Princeton that will attend seminars and will invite you to barbecues and other events. And you will be all joining our alumni group, AMIAS, now more than 6,000 scholars around the world that have come to Princeton. I'm not bothering you with our operating expenses, etc., but I want to show this. That actually, it's hardly visible, but you see federal grants, federal support money accounts only for 9% of our operating budget. And so that means that the other 91% is coming from gifts. We are largely philanthropically supported, largely again through our endowment that covers roughly 70%, but also private gifts. So we are really, in some sense, very special that we have also financial independence. I want to finish by this, a quote I like from Alice in Wonderland. It's the Red Queen, because you are thinking, where are we going? She said, well, you takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place, and that's basically the philosophy here. I think, we have almost now 90 years of the Institute for Advanced Study. I think in some sense it hasn't changed, and in many ways, of course, it did change because the world had changed. But I think it's very close still to the spirit of the usefulness of users' knowledge as articulated by Flexner. I think that's a great compliment to his vision, to have this idea that's strong enough to have all these different incarnations over many decades. And before I actually turn to our faculty to say something about the workings of the school, I want to end with which actually is the opening paragraph of Flexner's essay. And I find it very touching. Remember again, he published this in October 1939. In many cases, perhaps the worst moment, one of the worst moments in world history. And that's how he starts. It's not curious fact that in a world steeped in irrational hatred, which threatens civilization itself, men and women, old and young, detach themselves wholly or partly from the angry current of daily life, to devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty, to the extension of knowledge, to the cure of disease, to the amelioration of suffering, just as though fanatics were not simultaneously engaged in spreading pain, ugliness, and suffering. The world has always been a sorry and confused sort of place, yet poets and artists and scientists have ignored the factors that would, if attended to, paralyze them. And I think you are part of that group. So let me just finish by thanking you again for giving the great gift to us to come here as scholars. And I just want to wish you a wonderful time here this year at the Institute. Thank you very much. Now you will hear from 4 faculty members, and I just asked them to introduce themselves, and they will say something about the current proceedings of the 4 schools. And I'll start with Angelos.
Hello everybody, my name is Angelos Haniotis, and I am the Executive Officer of the School of Historical Studies and Professor of Ancient History and Classics, which means that I am a very dangerous man. You have seen what Abraham Flexner did to half of the medical school in the United States. I assume if a medical doctor was given the same possibility, he might have closed down half of the departments of classics. But fortunately, this hasn't happened yet. As you know, scholars create words in order to pretend that what they do is more important than what they actually do. And I will start with such a word, the word sphagistics. Robert mentioned that you will have a test at the end. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you know what sphagistics means. I don't think it will make it any better if I say it in Latin, sigillography. It is the study of seals. And here you see the seal of the Institute for Advanced Study, 2 women, one naked, the other dressed, holding hands, and showing an image of complete harmony. I have always found this image very disturbing, not because beauty is dressed and not naked, but because in historical studies, these 2 concepts of truth and beauty do not often go together. What is true is not necessarily beautiful. There is nothing beautiful about the Holocaust, for instance, and what is beautiful is not necessarily true. Glorifications, for instance, of the Athenian democracy do not have a lot to do with the reality. And I start with this in order to explain what we try to do in the School of Historical Studies. In the School of Historical Studies, we do not study the world as it should be, or we would like it to be. We study the world as it was in the past. We study human beings in various distant places and distant times, and this is why a 3rd image might have been part of this seal, which is the image of empathy. I do not know how empathy would be represented as an image. It is our effort to understand human beings, their dreams, their sufferings, their hopes, their fears. So the historians struggle somehow to reconcile truth and beauty by trying to understand distant places and distant times. Of course, sometimes we are influenced by our own ideas of what beauty is in order to understand truth, and sometimes this leads to misinterpretations of the past. The School of Historical Studies, as you already have heard, is one of the oldest schools. It was the first professor, my predecessor, Benjamin Merritt, was appointed in 1935 as a professor of epigraphy and ancient history. Then the school was formally created in 1949. Then there was a case of a divorce with the creation of the School of Social Studies, but we still raise some children together. The School of Historical Studies currently has 8 professors. Let me start from the remote past. I'm professor of ancient history and classics. Then we have Susan Akbari, who joined the Institute this year as Professor of Medieval Studies. Professor Francesca Trivellato, she is the Professor of Early Modern European History. Jonathan Haslam is Professor of Modern History and International Relations. Sabine Schmidtke, Professor of Islamic Studies and Near Eastern Studies. Nicola Di Cosmo, Professor of East Asian Studies. Eva Lambois, Professor of Art History. And Miles Jackson, Professor of the History of Science. What characterizes the school is the effort, or actually it happens without a lot of effort, to have a diversity of methods, approaches, and sources. You have already heard of the metaphor of the paradise used for the Institute. In ancient Persia, paradise is a place where you go in order to hunt. And this is precisely what we do. What we hunt are new sources that we didn't know of, new methods that we may develop, new approaches, and of course, new knowledge. And we do this by using a variety of sources. We study seeds and bones and texts and images and manuscripts. We study things that are as different as a very nice literary work and a very humble graffito, or we deal with philosophical treatises, but also with the very boring minutes of a trial in the medieval times. We sometimes work as solitary researchers. Sometimes we work in groups. We use, as I said, a variety of methods, including also modern methods, for instance, machine learning, which actually should be called machine teaching, because machines do not learn, they are being taught. Machine learning is, or might be used, for instance, for a better understanding of sources such as manuscripts, quizzes, and so on in order to bring them together and recognize their similarities. There are other methods that have been used in our school, for instance, DNA analysis in medieval times, or methods from natural sciences for the study of the climate. The School of Historical Studies continually changes in a dialogue with other disciplines, especially with the social sciences, or because of the discovery of new sources, or because simply of a continuous dialogue with contemporary society. For instance, something that has started as a study of the human past. I already mentioned empathy, our effort to understand human beings, and whoever is in a position to understand the suffering of a prisoner can understand the suffering of any prisoner. Someone who understands religious communities in dialogue and in communication with each other can understand dialogues between religious communities in any historical period, and so on. However, because of contemporary experiences, the School of Historical Studies has moved to a more holistic approach of what history means, not only the history of human beings, but also the history of the environment, or the history of climate, or even the history of animals. On the 29th of April, a very famous primatologist, Frans de Waal, is going to be invited to give a lecture at the Institute on the emotions of animals and what we can learn about the emotions of human beings. One of his work has been about reconciliation and arbitration processes among the animals, which is very, very instructive also for academic conflicts. So we try to have, as I said, a more holistic approach to the question of what history is. What is also important in our school is the fact that sometimes very small disciplines are represented. Disciplines that usually in universities or academic departments are represented by just one professor or none. For instance, papyrology, the study of ancient papyri, or epigraphic, the study of inscriptions, and we are very proud that we are in a position to invite members that represent what in Germany is usually called Orchideenfächer, the orchid subjects, because the orchids are beautiful, but they are useless. You cannot eat them when you are hungry. So this is why they are being under continuous attack. And if there is a place, a paradise, in a sense in which such flowers can grow and bloom and blossom, this is the Institute for Advanced Study, and we continue in this process. If you are interested in our work, the School of Historical Studies has a lunchtime seminar which meets on Mondays from 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. The program is in the Institute calendar, and visitors are always welcome. We do not have a theme as the School of Social Sciences, but we have seminars organized by the 8 faculty members, usually open to the members of the school, but if you are interested in one particular subject, you can always contact one of the professors and you can be part of this community. I think this has given you a general overview of what we are, what we do, what we aspire at, and I will be very happy to help any one of you in whatever you may need or answer in the future any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
So I'm Helmut Hofer, I'm the executive officer from the School of Mathematics. So let me welcome all members, in particular those in the School of Mathematics. There's actually a theory in the School of Historical Studies about how to recognize mathematicians on campus. It says, well, they are not well dressed, they are loud at tea time, and they eat all the cookies. But otherwise, they're actually quite nice chaps and characters. So as you already saw, and as you will see, the schools operate quite differently. And the activities in the School of Mathematics are mainly in pure mathematics and theoretical computer science. But this being said, we are also interested in more applied topics if there is a potential for the development of new mathematics. So how do we operate? So every year we have 30% of our members in a specific topic, so-called it's a special year topic, and 70% in all the other topics. And the secret of success is the opportunity or the endless opportunities for interactions between all these members in different fields. So the special topic this year is optimization, statistics, and theoretical machine learning. And there will be a workshop jointly with the School of Social Sciences on the social and ethical challenges in machine learning. And as you perhaps know, that some of these programs of machine learning are pretty successful, work pretty well, but it's not so clear how they would work under extreme circumstances. And you would like to have sort of a machinery, some, say, theory which sort of guarantees that within a certain range it actually does what it's supposed to be. In particular, if you want to use this in life and death situations, you definitely want to know what you have to expect. But we definitely believe that these kind of questions could potentially produce some new mathematics. So at the beginning of the year, we in general, so we have, if you are fully staffed, 8 faculty members and about 70 lines of membership, and 40 of those are postdocs. So every year we start the year by having 40 postdoc talks. Of course, they are a little bit shorter than what you might expect. They are 10 minutes and 5 minutes discussions. It goes over 2 weeks, and the new postdoc actually introduces himself or herself to the community so that everybody after 2 weeks knows what the others are working on. And we had some experiences where this only before we introduced these talks, that people figured out at the end of their stay that they could actually have a significant impact if they just would have talked. So in order that everybody knows is on the same page, we start like this. Actually, we are very proud of our postdoc program. It's been a great success. So you can measure it in different metrics. But for example, out of the 36 Fields medals, the last 36 Fields medals, 30% of the postdocs, 30 of them were postdocs who had been here within the first 3 years after their PhD, and similar statistics for the European Prize in Mathematics. So the steady state, as I said, of permanent faculty in the school is 8. Currently, we have 5.5, so we have 2.5 searches going on. And I think we are the only school with fractional searches. So, of course, fraction is a rational number, and we never tried irrational searches, I must say. Oh, that's a mathematical joke. Okay, forget about it. So in addition, we have quite a number of arrangements on the level of visiting professors. I just want to mention the name. Sanjeev Arora, he is actually running the special program. Vladimir Drinfeld, Irit Dinur, Juni Hu, Helene Eno, Tonyan Pitassi, Karen Uhlenbeck, and Lai Zhang Yang. Lai Zhang Yang is joined with systems biology, and that is another example where we believe new mathematics could be created. So they witnessed some kind of, in systems biology, some kind of dynamical systems, but it doesn't fit in whatever we know and have done in mathematics about dynamical systems, and it needs presumably a new kind of description, and we might have in the near future some small activity to explore what the opportunities are in this direction. So the secret of success in our school is, in fact, interactions. And one of those are the mathematical conversations. These are 20-minute talks, 10-minute formal discussion, and then if you really like the topic, you can stay around for several hours. One of the interesting features is there are free drinks. So now, The model for this were the after-hours conversations, which is institutes-wide. These are 10-minute talks, no props, and 20-minute discussions, and we're always looking for volunteers there. And that is actually quite a popular program, but you have to pay for your drink. Okay, so now let me mention here some recent titles, and then we have a quiz here. Here are some recent titles from the mathematical conversations. A, how deep is your proof? B, bad behavior. Well, it could be a joint project, I guess, with social sciences. But C, mathematical structures in the jungles of life. So let me tell you that one of these talks was given by the Abel Prize winner Misha Gromov. So let's figure out if you know which one. Who thinks A? How deep is your proof? Everybody can participate. You can vote even if you don't know what you're voting on. A. How deep is your proof? Nobody. Bad behavior. Mathematical structures in the jungles of life. Yeah, that was it. Mathematical structures in the jungles of life. This mass conversations will start on October 9th and on Thursday, October 7th. How can that be true? Anyway, it must be on Monday, October 7th, sorry. The after hours start. So then let me also point out that I think not only for mathematicians, the lunch table is very important. And I think in particular I urge the mathematicians to go there. The etiquette is you sit closest to the persons who are already there and you start talking about something which you find interesting. And in fact, let me quote a former member. At the lunch table I learn more than in all the seminars. And it's definitely true in mathematics. So then, a general advice, I think, for everybody. For your stay at IIS, keep the following in mind. There are 4. First, failure is an acceptable option, and here is a place to take risks. B, the first paper in a field is easier to write than the second, but there's a prerequisite. Don't be afraid to go into the jungle to find the material for the first paper. C, if you don't struggle and if everything is easy, you're operating below your abilities. And D, if you get excited about your result, it is wrong. If you are if you are maximally bored by your result, you presumably know what you are doing and there's a chance it is correct. Thanks.
So after this talk, I will try to do the most boring talk possible. So I am Stanislas Leibler. I'm a professor in School of Natural Sciences, and which includes biology. And I am a physicist who moved to biology, so I'm counted as a biologist here. And the school has 9 professors, and 5 professors emeriti. And among 9 professors, there are 3 who work in astrophysics and cosmology. These are James Stone, who arrived recently on campus, Scott Tremaine and Matthias I will not pronounce it, apparently, Zeledariaga. Nima Arkady Hamed, who is now in physics, Juan Maldacena, Nati Seiberg, Ed Witten, so 4 of them. And then is a great moment because I can introduce Mikhail Sodeks, who is today for the first time here, who just arrived in biology. He's a scientist, theoretical neuroscientist, who just arrived as a permanent faculty. And half of me is here. The other half, I have a laboratory, experimental laboratory in Rockefeller University in New York. So what are the connections between these three fields? There are very strong connections between astrophysics and cosmology and particle physics. And one of the subjects which is now excites both of these fields are black holes. As we know, there's a new subfield of astrophysics, which is gravitational wave spectroscopy, and the first waves observed by a collision of two black holes. And other people in particle physics are interested of the properties of the black holes. There is no connection, to my knowledge, for the moment, with the black holes in biology. So we are trying to find connection with other departments or schools, in particular in mathematics, as Helmut just mentioned. Other way how you recognize a mathematician, in particular you, is when every time I sit next to you, I have some homework to do afterwards. So this conversation today about next program or activity, as the first thing to do is that I have to do some homework for Helmut. And so we cannot, unfortunately, in biology for the moment, find black holes in any of our systems. So we made some other connections, and in particular, you talk always about astronomical numbers, and we try to make competition with our friends in astrophysics and cosmology. So for some of you who like numbers, let me tell you the number of stars of the universe is roughly 10 to the 24 estimated. The number of bacteria on Earth is estimated at 10 to the 30. So we have at least 1 million times more bacteria on Earth than the stars in the universe. And even if you talk about galaxies, which is estimated, and I cannot assure that is the correct number, but few 10 to the 11 is nothing compared to bacteria in our body. We have roughly the same number of bacteria in our body than our own cells in the body. And it's 10 to the 13, 10 to the 13. So it's again factor of 100 times bigger than galaxies in the universe. So this shows you that we talk about astronomical numbers really than astronomy colleagues. And so we try to understand them in biology, and we do it with, we heard from previous speakers how the things are organized. First, the activities in astrophysics, for example, and particle physics is similar, are very close to also activities in Princeton University. Many seminars are common. And just to tell you, I just verified today that there are 15 seminars this week in astrophysics and cosmology alone between Princeton University and the Institute for Advanced Study. So 3 seminars per day. This is really too much for me. So in biology, what we do, we don't announce, we have one seminar every so often, and every so often is really random. It's on Wednesdays, but it's a random day. And if you want to come, you are welcome. We will put you on the mailing list because they are not announced. Our room is small. However, you should know that there are some special things about the seminar. They start in our small room, and they first part finish at lunch. So this is how you introduce space-time for biologists. And and then they go after the lunch till the tea time, and very often they go after tea time. So if you come to a seminar, you can spend the whole day. And we need this, we find, because then we know a little bit what our colleagues who we invite from different places are really working on in the end of the day. which I personally forget next day, but this is another story, a biological phenomenon. Now there are visitors, and in the School of Natural Sciences this year there's at least 57 members and visitors. Among them, members are, in contrast to mathematics, for example, come for extended period of times, typically 3 years, and they can be, in fact, they spend up to 5 years. This is a kind of rule in the institute. The maximum is 5 years, and visitors are people, for example, coming for sabbatical, and we have a pleasure this year to have in our school 3 professors from physics and electrical engineering in our department, coming from Princeton University, Ravindra Bhatt, David Hughes, Elliot Lieb. And we have 3 distinguished visitors, visiting professors. In physics is Alexei Kitaev from Caltech, who work, among others, on quantum computing. And many of you know Rashid Sunayev, who have spent many sabbaticals or extended periods of time here from Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics in Germany. And already the third distinguished visiting professor who was mentioned is Lai-Sang Yang, who comes from Courant Institute, who will spend time between mathematics and biology. This, I think, is everything I wanted to say. Please, you are all welcome to come. If I think maybe I'm wrong, the biggest blackboard is in Bloomberg Hall on 2 walls, and you should come. And if you don't want your things to be erased, you should explicitly say this. There's also a very nice room where I see more and more people coming from outside from our school, which is in the biology building, which is part of Bloomberg Hall. And it has a nice view on the woods and a nice atmosphere. And if you come, let us know. There's a coffee machine, and you are most welcome to come anytime. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Didier Fassin. I'm a professor of social science, and I'm the executive officer of the School of Social Science. Our school is the one that has experienced the most spectacular expansion over the past few months since our faculty has doubled in size, increasing from 1 to 2. And indeed we are normally the smallest school with 4 faculty. You heard earlier from Robert about the big 4. Clifford Geertz, Albert Hirschman, Michael Walzer, and Joan Scott. But we also have the pleasure to have a new faculty, Alondra Nelson. She's a sociologist of science, was previously professor of sociology and dean of social science at Columbia University. She's still the president of the SSRC, the Social Science Research Council, and she has been interested in particular in genetics and artificial intelligence, wrote a book that is quite famous, The Social Life of DNA. But she's also has work in which she explores the sociology of race, race discrimination, and racial reparation. We have also the pleasure to have with us this year as a visiting professor, Marion Fourcade. She's an economic sociologist, and she works more specifically among several topics on the new forms of social stratification and moral economies linked to the use of personal data. So although we are small, the school covers a wide range of disciplines through its 35 members and visitors. So we have anthropologists, sociologists, historians, economists, legal scholars, political scientists, students in the media, and in modern thought. Each year we have a theme, and we choose it trying to address important scientific questions at the same time as relevant contemporary issues. So just to give you examples, we had recently borders and crisis, and I'm sure you understand how relevant they can be. But this year it's economy and society. And just to give you a few ideas of the research that are being done, the history of venture capitalism, the political economy of asset management, the international climate change negotiations, the economy of debt in India or in Brazil, social credit in China, valuation of life in Spain. And by the way, there's a film series that we organize with the librarian, Marsha Tucker, which is open to to all of you. It's related to the theme economy and society. The first to be screened is The Big Short, and as all our films, this movie will be followed by a discussion with the public by one or two of our members. But the scholars working on the theme represent about 1/2 of the total number of our members and visitors. We are open to other research. And just again to give you a few examples, the use of digital data by international institutions, the use of genetic database by the police and justice system, the ethics of gene editing, the history of sexual violence, the sociology of women in politics in France, or the anthropology of migration and displacement in Yemen. Of course, when you hear these two lists, and I shorten them, you may think that it is an extraordinarily heterogeneous set of research, but we think that what makes the experience of spending 1 year in the School of Social Science is the diversity of disciplines, of topics and countries that each of us are exposed to during this period. And this is something that at the end of the year, most of our colleagues tell us how it has been an enrichment of their reflection and of their personal research. It was mentioned that the seminar of the School of Historical Studies was at lunchtime on Monday. Ours is at 10 o'clock in the morning on Mondays, so you can spend the whole morning and lunchtime going from social science to historical studies and have a very rich moment. Even if you're a mathematician or a physicist or a biologist, you're all invited, and you can see the program on the website. This exploration of scientific boundaries, as Helmut mentioned earlier, will get us to work together with the mathematicians of the machine learning program on question ethical, social, and political related to the use of machine learning. And we will have two special workshops with interdisciplinary, one in November and one in March. A few years ago, we identified that we had a lack of geographical diversity, and we know how crucial this geographical diversity is for the social science, perhaps differently from, let's say, mathematics or physics. At the time, we had only scholars from North America and Europe. Now we have from 6 continents, but moreover, we developed a summer program in social science in which we invite for 2 weeks here at the Institute for the first year, and the second year in Bogota and Johannesburg, early career scholars from Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. And we've been doing that for now 5 years, and it's extraordinarily successful in terms of the vibrancy of these groups of young scholars. And finally, I want to mention, since it is inscribed in a long tradition that has been reminded to us by Robert earlier, that as we know, the situation of academics across the world, in many parts at least, has been increasingly difficult. There's also a Scholar at Risk program in which we participate. We had scholars from Cameroon, Azerbaijan, China, and Turkey, and we think that it is a continuation of something that has happened since the very beginning of this institution. Thank you.
So thanks to my 4 colleagues of introducing the school. I think actually we're running a little bit late, so I propose that any questions are being asked and perhaps answered over drinks and some bites, and that we finish this formal part of the Welcome Day, and I hope we all move to Simon's Hall for the more entertaining part of today. So I hope to see you there, and thank you so much for attending this afternoon. Thank you.